one of the reasons I wrote the book, okay, one of the reasons was I know that our media is censored.
Yeah.
And I know, in my book, I call them the white polites, all the nice people who are very polite about everything. I know that if you ask questions that are outside of the nice, comfortable, politically correct world, that then it makes them feel very uncomfortable. They don't want to write about it or talk about it. When I was looking at all of the material that was happening in the UK, I kept getting an uneasy feeling and asking, is this happening here in Canada? And you know what? Probably, likely not to the scale they have in the UK, but it's probably happening here too, and we don't know about it because it makes it awkward when you actually point out that a certain cultural framework is treating people a certain horrible way. And so I've highlighted in one of my Substacks, I called it the crime we are forbidden to name. Okay. That's the targeted abuse, rape, and sometimes even murder of white girls. We're just not allowed to talk about it. It was just like not considered a hate crime. It's just a crime. Well, no, it's a hate crime because these gangs in the UK specifically targeted white girls almost exclusively, and some Sikh and Hindu children.
Welcome everyone to another Dialogue Over Division episode, and I'm pleased to have with me Maret Jaks, who is in Canada, but she's turned her attention to something that is now gaining a lot of attention in the UK, and it's a really difficult subject, but it's something we really need to talk about because we're going to be talking about the gang rapes that are going on. And this is affecting incredibly vulnerable people, young ladies. And it seems that I'm even just almost uncomfortable just talking about it right now. But if nobody is talking about it, nobody is there for these young girls. So brace yourselves for this episode. But thank you, Maret, for getting into this discussion and bringing light to this. So I'm going to turn it over to you and maybe just give us a bit of an insight as to how you got involved in this first.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me on your program. And if I rewind for a second, I have been dealing and helping young people all my life. That's just part of who I am. I had 4 foster children. I had my own business. I still have my own business. So I managed to juggle motherhood, foster motherhood, business, and also what we used to call the decent type of social justice as opposed to what it is now, which is, for example, helping women in prison. So I used to volunteer and help women in prison, and a lot of those women who are in prison started out with really tough childhoods. And part of the reason I could relate to that is not because my childhood was like that, but because I come from a really difficult working class background. Everyone except my father was either truck driver or in prison, okay, on my dad's side. And so their kids had really big issues sometimes and so on. So my growing up years, I had really close relationships with cousins who, by the way, some of whom ended up in jail, and I would go visit them too. So I know these people who have troubled backgrounds need support, and I used to do that kind of work. I also worked against the widespread distribution of pornography into children's lives and spaces. That was in the 1990s because my business is in technology, and I saw that the internet was coming. It was on its way, and we needed to protect children from having that seep into their personal lives. And as you know, I can tell I failed on that because a lot of us who were working to protect children simply could not get the ear of our politicians. So having said that, putting all that background there, I've been working and traveling, and my consulting work took me overseas and so on. And so I've often read a lot of work, a lot of news outlets in Europe, because when I was living in Europe, I wanted to see what was going on. And as a result, when I started to discover that, there was a widespread issue with child rape gangs in the UK, I thought, what's happening here? Because if you remember, even going back a bit, when Angela Merkel opened up Europe to anyone who wanted to show up from North Africa and the Middle East, a lot of influx of young males appeared in Europe. And on the December 31st, 2015, 1,200 women and girls were sexually assaulted by largely men of Muslim backgrounds from North Africa and the Middle East. What's interesting is that your average news outlet didn't report that. And because I read all sorts of news sources, I stumbled upon that story in Breitbart, of all places. And I thought, Breitbart's pretty right-wing, and why are they the only people writing about this horrific rape and sexual assault that's going on in Germany? And oh, by the way, even worse things are happening in the UK. And so I started to focus on that and ended up writing a book called Notes from a Blonde, Why This Anything Goes Multiculturalism Has to Go. Because in Canada, we have this real issue with multiculturalism trumping women's rights, and that shouldn't be happening. So all of that is background, my care for kids, my foster parenting, understanding at-risk children, having family members who have been not only at risk, but in jail. So putting all of that together, realizing that we need to take a look at what's going on in the UK, and what I found set my hair on fire. I mean, it was unbelievable. That was in 2016 when I wrote the book. It didn't get much traction. And in fact, I have to shamefully say, I got worried that I might not get my next contracts. So I took the book off the market because, you're not allowed to say you're against multiculturalism in Canada because people then just like to lump you into the bad categories of being a Nazi and far right. So I took it off the market, and then I put it back in 2023 because I thought we have to talk about these things. Now, the good news, and the reason we're talking is because Elon Musk went, oh my gosh, and it set his hair on fire, what he discovered, and he started tweeting about it, and that's why we're here.
Yeah, I have to admit, there's only certain things that I can put my head around and try to advocate for, and this was one that I wasn't really keen to look into. And then I actually saw Elon Musk's tweet where he just cut paragraph out of a court decision, and it broke my heart. Just the fact
it's worse than you can possibly imagine, isn't it?
And that's what he said. Yeah. And that was one paragraph. So, why don't we get into first? Yeah, let's talk about what you started to do. So, what is your book about? And so, tell us how you came to write it and what it does talk about.
Okay, so just again, Notes from a Blonde, Why This Anything Goes Multiculturalism Has to Go. Just to let you know, I used to be very much on the left. Okay, I'm no longer on the left. The left left me a long time ago. So I used to be on the left. And even then, back in the 1980s, when Pierre Trudeau said that we have to have multiculturalism in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I thought, I actually don't support multiculturalism. And I don't support multiculturalism for the simple fact that there isn't one culture anywhere in the world that treats women half as humanely as the West treats women. So why, after I've worked so many years to get equal rights for women, to have family law rules that now allow women to have half the family assets, that allow women to make decisions on their own and go to university, etc., why would I just blanketly say, sure, any culture over here? So I've never, ever been in support of what I call an anything goes multiculturalism. Societies evolve and get richer by a mix and mingle of cultural behaviors. But when you think about what we've done in the West, we're the first time in human history that we know of where all adults have the right to vote. All human adults have the right to live peacefully and honorably in the world around them and basically live to their heart's content. And all of a sudden we're supposed to say, but that's not a culture. That's just us, being a nice group of people, and whatever anybody else wants is more important. And that's where I've never supported multicultural. That's the anything goes multiculturalism. My family background on my mother's side is Estonian. So of course we have cultural practices that are, well accepted in Canada and part of our world. When my mother got here, it was very awkward for her because it was a very Protestant world, and she, didn't speak the language very well, etc. But long story short, it's a culture. The West is a place that absorbs cultures, intermingles, etc. But we have been told by our Charter of Rights and Freedoms that we must accept any culture as it is. And I find that to be inherently racist, sexist, homophobic, and anti-Semitic. And I have examples of that in my book. So for example...
I'd like to hear why you think that the charter is the issue here. So maybe if you have examples or can explain that.
So
I don't see that connection.
Okay, so there's two things. One is to say that even in cultures in the West that don't have multiculturalism baked in, it's become an attitude on the left that multiculturalism has to be accepted. But if we talk about why I don't accept multiculturalism as an anything goes, what I found in my research is that you'll have situations where, girls have these rights, but if you're a brown girl and you live in a culture that says you must be treated secondarily, that's your culture and that's okay. And there are some lovely people who come here and are told multicultural, whatever you do in your world, you can do it here. And it's really important to say, no, actually, women have special rights compared to what happens in the country of origin that you come from. And you need to respect and honor how we're treated here. So one example I'll give you is that, I'm going to rewind, in 9/11, I went to the airport in Toronto. I drove in an hour, and I remember when I heard about the horrible terrorist situation in New York, I thought, I'm not going to let these terrorists put a hole in my heart. I'm going to go and do something that makes this day something to remember in a good way. And I don't know if you remember back then, but the carts that you got at the airport in Toronto, you had to have a toonie, okay? Now, who wanders around internationally with toonies? Nobody wanders around. And by the way, there's Americans listening, a toonie is a $2 coin. So I happen to have about 20 or 30 toonies in my house. I put them in my purse, and I got to the airport, walked past all the machine guns because I looked official, and I went in to try to help people get carts. Just anyone who was redirected to Toronto and hadn't even expected to be here, I got them carts, and I would pass the carts around. And this one family were Muslim immigrants from Nigeria who I helped, but then they were so traumatized because their little boy had been sick, had been at the hospital, brought back, and now they were trying to find their luggage. And they asked me they said, please stay with us. And I said, okay, I'll stay with you. I'm just going to do some other things. And I stayed with them. I bought them some water, some croissants, because that's all they had left at the food place. Long story short, I called my brother and I said, these guys can't get out. The airport officials have asked me to take them home because they're all about to go on a bus to Detroit, and there's no hotels in Detroit. They're all going to be ending up sleeping in the airport, and the airline officials are worried that the little baby's not well enough to travel. So I'm taking these people home. Can you please bring me a baby seat? And he did. He came to the airport, dropped the babies. And I took these people out to my home, and they lived with us for 10 days. Okay.
Wow.
Good, lovely people. And I know that, Muslims don't eat pork. And so we made sure they didn't get pork in our house, and they had good food for what they needed. And we helped get them out of the country to where they were going to be resettling in the United States. He's a lawyer, and she is a social worker, and they were, emigrating to Philadelphia. And as a result of that whole process, we became really good friends. Okay, really good friends. And at one point, they were living in the Midwest, right in a little town, right in the middle of America. And I wake up very early in the morning. So Oye and I would go for a walk in the mornings, and we'd walk to McDonald's to get coffee because they didn't drink coffee, but I need it in the morning. So we'd get there. And as we're walking along, I said, hey, is there a mosque in this little town? And he said, oh, yes, but we won't let our sons go. And I said, well, why not? And he said, because of what they teach. And I said, well, what do they teach? And here's what they teach. And I'm going to guarantee it's happening in Canada. And what they teach is that a dog is haram. That's, filthy, dirty. Okay. And that some real sects in Islam believe dogs are dirty. I've had dog sitters who were Muslim because they think you just have to wash your hands before dinner. So they're like different sects have different attitudes. So the imam said to the boys and all the other kids, dogs are haram. But you can acknowledge a dog when you walk down the road. Infidel males are also haram, but you can acknowledge them too, like you can acknowledge a dog. But female infidels, people like me, blonde women, they're haram and less than a dog. Never acknowledge a female infidel. And he told me, so I just couldn't take that. That was disgusting. I wasn't going to let my son learn that kind of thing. We took both our boys out. And I said, thank you, Oye. That's very nice to know. And Oye is great. But what killed me was I realized, in Toronto, that happens to me. I'm walking down the street. I'm an infidel a mile away. I'm blonde. And I'm walking along, and groups of Muslim people will be walking toward me and just walk right into me. Okay. So I'm always jumping out of the way. And sometimes, and I look at them, I say hello or something, and they just, now lots of Muslim people are fabulous and they don't do that. Okay. But I think there are sects of that going on where they feel justified in our multicultural world to apply that horse shit at us. And so what I've advised my friends to do, because they went, oh, that happens to me too. And they just kind of connected the dots. And I said, so that, most people don't do that. But when that happens, just keep walking. Make them walk around you because you do exist and you should be acknowledged. So that's one more example where people coming to Canada, some people feel justified to take those attitudes and apply it to people like me, who should not be treated badly like that. Yeah. There's lots of that stuff going on. But what was really horrific around the child rape gang situation was that for 30 years in the UK, and they've now found it's at least 50 towns, groups of largely Pakistani Muslim men, and some of whom are British citizens, some who aren't, will target little girls, groom them by making them feel that they're a boyfriend or whatever, and then begin to rape them and then pass them around to other friends and family members and so on, and then transfer them from one town to another, basically in the sex trafficking trade. And at a certain point, they get a little bit too old, like it goes between 11 to 15 typically, and after 16, 17, they dump them. They will find, they've found a few 9-year-olds in that model too, like they've taken them in. I'm not going to go, the issue for me, it's actually horrible what's happening. The issue for me is what is happening around the police and officials. That's what I'm upset about, what the criminals have done. I probably will tell you I'm even more upset with what the UK establishment has not done. And what they've not done is protected those children. So in 2003, for example, a writer named Andrew Norfolk moved to one of these towns where it was happening, and he kind of knew about it. But, he just didn't want to give fuel to the far right, so he didn't write about it for years. Finally, in 2011, he broke the story, okay, and it became more and more well-known. But throughout that time, there were social workers who tried to help, but many chose not to. But when the social workers would call the police would say, oh, we don't want to we don't want to upset the multicultural, we don't want to rock the multicultural boat. We don't want to rock that boat. And so they would ignore what they were doing and not protect these kids. And because these kids were poor and because they were working class, they were easy to ignore because who cares about poor kids? I mean, these weren't the nice, posh children who were being assaulted. These are the ones who are already having a hard time in life. And a large number of them were in children's aid services, like being looked after by the state. And they were just left to their fate. And it was pretty horrific fate, as you saw from what Elon Musk posted. That was pretty rough.
To understand, they were already in the state system, some of these girls.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why social workers were involved. So they were under foster care, or possibly bad parental family. But obviously, this is all just, I have no words most of the time.
It is. That's what, obviously Elon Musk didn't either because he kept tweeting and tweeting stuff out. Yeah.
But you said not to rock the multiculturalism or whatever, but these are serious crimes. Like, I don't understand when you could, like, this isn't just whether or not a girl is wearing coverings or something like that.
Yeah.
This is about rape. This is about violence. This is about a kidnapping. This is not a little petty cultural issue. So how on earth did police officials who are there to put rule and order in place and charge on those bases? These are, again, very serious crimes. So when social workers were saying it, why was it so easily dismissed? Because that doesn't even make any rational sense to me.
I'm going to bring it back to Canada for a second, then go back to the UK. One of the reasons I wrote the book, one of the reasons was I know that our media is censored. Yeah. And I know, in my book, I call them the white polites, all the nice people who are very polite about everything. I know that if you ask questions that are outside of the nice, comfortable, politically correct world, that then it makes them feel very uncomfortable. They don't want to write about it or talk about it. When I was looking at all of the material that was happening in the UK, I kept getting an uneasy feeling and asking, is this happening here in Canada? And you know what? Likely not to the scale they have in the UK, but it's probably happening here too, and we don't know about it because you can have, first of all, people have a nasty attitude toward, quote, lower class or working class people, and when they're in the posh world and having university degrees and all that. But the second thing is, it makes it awkward when you actually point out that a certain cultural framework is treating people a certain horrible way. And so I've highlighted in one of my Substacks, I called it the crime we are forbidden to name. Okay, that's the targeted abuse, rape, and sometimes even murder of white girls. We're just not allowed to talk about it. It was just not considered a hate crime. It's just a crime. Well, no, it's a hate crime because these gangs in the UK specifically targeted white girls almost exclusively, and some Sikh and Hindu children. Just to let you know, there are a few of those as well that were targeted in. Now, how could they ignore it? Well, for example, the Labour Party in the UK, there's a number of, I forgot the gentleman's name, but he was a former Labour Party member and MP. And he had said he was told specifically by Labour officials, don't bring up the story around these rape gangs. They called them grooming gangs at the time. Don't bring that story forward because, it'll impact our ability to win the election. Okay, because large groups of people are in certain sections of the UK come from that background, and they didn't want to set it up as a racial issue. It is a racial issue, and some groups have to be taught that the white girls should not be treated that way. Okay, so anyway, that was one of the things. The other one was they were afraid of violence and so on that would happen. And so they just kept trying to keep it down, keep it down, keep it down. And if you think about it, the story was broken in 2011. How much did you hear about that in Canada?
Not at all. I didn't hear
Nope.
any.
And again, the only reason I did, I had been living in Europe, so I was accustomed to reading European news, and that's when I went, what is happening? And again, it was this is, as far as I'm concerned, the crime of the century. I mean, it's just thousands and tens of thousands of little girls who have been robbed of not only their childhood, but as one MP said, you're killing the soul of that person, the way they were treated. And I'm not going to go into the details. You can go to my Substack and read some of the stuff I have there. One of them is Time to Rock the Multicultural Boat. And as I write about it, I actually put a pause in there and I say, look, if you can't read this, please jump, just skip over it, because, most of us can imagine how horrible rape is, but this was more than, quote, I'm only saying, quote, just a rape. It was beyond what you can imagine. And this was a 12-year-old child that Elon Musk tweeted about. So you're familiar with what that is.
Yeah.
So how could they do it? It's actually when they held multiculturalism and mass immigration in the UK to a higher value than little white girls who were poor. That's how.
Yeah. And, I don't dismiss, or I don't think that what the media did was okay. I don't think what the elected officials did was okay. But still, going back to the police officers, it's their role and responsibility to enforce laws. And the lawmakers make the laws, but there's those laws for a reason. And so I still can't get over police officers saying this is going to rock the multicultural boat, because that's not
actually that was an MP who said that. An MP who said that. But again, they get leadership from that.
I don't say that I think that's okay. But so were these people getting charged and it was just being kept quiet, or were they not being charged at all? Obviously, if it was going on for so long.
No. A couple of things that would happen is fathers would call the police and say, I need your help. My daughter's in this house with 5 men and I want her home. And the police would do nothing. So then the father went to that home. The father was arrested and the police left the little girl and the 5 men there. In another example, a father called...
I heard that story and I couldn't believe it. And you seem to have understanding. And I'd like to... What did the police say? Is it clear why they said that? What did the father get arrested for? Now I'm mad.
No, I know. He got arrested, I think, for trespassing. So the person who called was one of the men who owned the house.
And he was the legal guardian of the child.
Yeah. Yep.
What about kidnapping charge?
No, because so sometimes what happens is the girl will say, I want to stay here. Okay. But the thing is, it doesn't matter. Right? Now, another example, 12 years old, half naked and drunk. The police show up because the parents called, my daughter's over there. Daughter got arrested. In her house with a whole bunch of men.
But for what?
For drunk and disorderly. She was 12 and drunk. She got arrested.
And did they take her away at least and bring her back to her?
Yeah, they did take her away. But why would she be punished? And that's one of the things, if you listen to some of the adult survivors now, they were children at the time, they will talk a lot about how they were always being told they were wrong. Now, fast forward, there's a lovely young woman named Samantha Smith, very articulate, and she had been abused from the age of 5 to 14, okay? And I don't know all of her story and background because, I don't need to keep reading about abuse of children. But I did follow her on Twitter, and I have watched her on GB News when she was talking about what happened and how she was treated and how the girls were often the ones that had the fingers pointed at them. And just to remind your audience,
by the state, by the police.
Yeah, exactly. Just to remind your audience, a 12-year-old cannot consent to sex. That's called rape.
Yes,
I know.
Drinking
I know.
To an excursion without parental consent. They don't have, and this is one thing maybe I just want to say because of all these other issues. Literally, children don't have rights. Parents have rights on the children. Children can't get anything. There's a reason that they can't get a visa. There's a reason that they can't go to war.
Yeah.
So they don't have a right literally to anything except for, well, nothing.
I know. Well, they have a right to be treated fairly in their home and not beaten. But aside from that, but evidently not. They don't have that right if they leave their home and are in their home with 5 men. But in the UK, so Samantha Smith is someone to remember. And what's also interesting in GB News, which you can watch on YouTube, and you can get a flavor for what's going on over there. And one of their reporters, Charlie Peters, has been just at the forefront of trying to bring this forward. He's got a lot of good information and contacts. He has good and sensitive stories. He's got good relationships with some of the adult survivors. And so I give them a lot of credit. So GB News, you can watch online. And I was watching Samantha being interviewed, and I often will watch news at lunchtime when I'm taking a break. And I was watching her being interviewed. I thought, that's very interesting. And, I'm glad she's able to put this framework together, and she's so well-spoken. That's great, because a lot of the kids weren't, quote, well-spoken. And of course, the posh people, especially in Britain, if you speak with a funny northern accent, who are you? Anyway, that night she went home. The next day, I should say, after her interview, the police knocked at her door for basically daring to speak up. That's happened to a couple of the victims. And now, because Samantha has a platform, she was able to call this out. But even then, for her, she's 20 years old. She's making her lunch and the police are at her door. That's scary to these girls. They've been through enough. And rather than have someone like the current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, say, this is a horrific experience. I'm sorry it happened. Let us figure out how to make it never happen again. What he does is say, Musk, you're lying. Elon Musk, you're lying. Shut up. And, come on. But that's his pattern. And when you asked before, how come the police didn't charge? In the UK, there is a serious 2-tier justice system. Very, very serious. You had, during the Southport riots this summer, you had gangs of Muslim men running around with machetes. They didn't get arrested. You had a girl, she's 23, so she's an adult, walking home from work, seeing the riots happen, started to live stream it on her phone, and she was arrested and has 20 months in jail.
So the 2-tier justice system is based on culture and elitism, I'm assuming too, because if you have access to different
elitism and absolutely, working class culture and versus posh culture, and the culture of the white community versus the multicultural community, whatever, but largely that. And so, do you remember the Southport riots this summer? Remember that?
That was in Ontario?
No, Southport, no, it's okay. I follow this really closely all over the place. But
that's the UK.
In the UK, what happened was this. Southport, UK. There's a Southport, US, Southport, Canada, Southport, UK. Anyway, Southport, UK. In the UK, there was a horrific event where a man went into a dance class with little girls under age 10, stabbed 10 of them, killed 3, 6, 7, and 9 years old, dead. And the outpouring of rage and fear from the parents and the community, and again, working class, was really strong. And some of the people were rioters in that outpouring. And a lot of them were parents who were horrified that yet again, little kids were being stabbed, because there's a lot of stabbing and it's a one-way street, okay? So they were upset about that. A lot of them, because they're working class, absolutely do know about the largely Pakistani Muslim British rape gangs, child rape gangs. And that was all that together was this rage that built up in this anger. And Keir Starmer went and threw people in jail almost instantly for hurty tweets, for nasty tweets, for tweets that came up and then came back down. One tweet was considered false because the person claimed that it was the Muslim person who had done this. And then she realized there was no evidence, so she took it down. Oh, she's in jail for 30 months. So it goes on and on and on. He went and Keir Starmer, the prime minister, put some flowers down in Southport where the memorial was for the children. And he said nothing to the crowd. And the crowd was angry and yelling at him. And a kind-hearted soul could handle the yells and turn and say, I'm so sorry this is happening. We need to stop this kind of horror. I'll see what we can do, but we can't have violence to solve it, which is true. You shouldn't have violence to solve it. He didn't do that. He just walked away in complete silence. And you know what he did within a couple of days? Trotted off to a mosque, sat down with the men of the mosque and said, we hate Islamophobia. That's two-tier. I hate Islamophobia too. You shouldn't be hateful against anybody because of their religion. But you should recognize what's going on in your community and care about all your citizens. And he is really not doing that. You have people in jail who, for unbelievable lengths of time, to show as an example to everybody else to shut up. And it frightens people. That's not right.
Well, and it adds fuel to the fire. And I think we could talk for hours just about some of the similarities and what's happened in Canada. But what I just, when elected officials who are meant to represent everyone are dismissive of one group, what is that group going to do? It's going to just get more emboldened and mad and distrustful. And the whole role of these elected officials, recognize, okay, of course, like you said, violence, of course, is not the solution. The riots isn't the solution, but let's investigate why this is happening. Let's investigate why the temperature is so high here. What is going on? It doesn't take a lot of work to figure it out because it's gotten so bad. But not even to put any consideration into that is just so...
Well, exactly. And not only that, if you watched after Elon Musk came out and started pointing fingers, now I have to say, normally I would say a billionaire should not be involved in other countries' business. I totally would normally say that. I really strongly feel that a billionaire should just be a citizen in his own country, as well. Just because you got lots of money doesn't mean you should have more power than other citizens. But nonetheless, having said that, in this case, I disagree, because nobody, and Keir Starmer, by the way, was head of the prosecution services in England when all of this was happening, and he didn't do anything extraordinary to really help these kids. So anyway, I would normally say that, but because nobody in England at the top echelons has cared, not the previous Conservative government, not the Labour government before the previous Conservative government, and certainly not this Labour government. No one's helped these people. And so if it has to be Elon Musk, well, let it be Elon Musk. Someone has to care. And so when that came out, of course, the left-wing media started trying to deflect. Oh, look over here. Oh, look over there. That little tiny, tiny word wasn't true. And a funny little story, on January 6th, Keir Starmer got in front of the podium to announce his government's new policies and that the go forward plan for the government. And first started by saying, Keir Starmer started to say, Elon Musk, you're lying, blah, blah, blah. Musk has not been lying, okay? He has not been lying. he might have said some untoward things and really should have toned certain things down, but he hasn't been lying. So anyway, and then Keir Starmer went and announced his policy. And did you hear anything about that TikTok video that went up and then came right back down?
I didn't know.
Okay, it's actually so horrible it's funny. It's actually so horrible it's funny. And I'm putting out a video on that because I think it's either a Freudian slip on the Labour Party's part in the UK or it's something more sinister. But here's what happened. So Keir Starmer's policies had some good things. Trains are going to be better. You're going to feel safer with walking down the street, whatever. And for every one of those policies, they used AI to create a human anthropomorphized animal. So England was represented as the lion walking down the street upright. Police was a bulldog. It was a bulldog walking upright. They had all these different animals and, whatever. And then behind that and the messaging that was written on the TikTok video, behind that was a Portuguese song. Now, two things. I've shown that to friends without telling them what it's about. And they don't like the music. They go, oh, that feels evil. The song feels really evil. And I said, yeah, well, just wait till you hear the lyrics. So just because the Labour Party doesn't understand Portuguese, there are some people who understand Portuguese. And they went, what? So this song was all about drugging little girls to have sex with them. Yeah, and it went on and on and on. And it says young women. And then it also said little girl. The very last two lines, and I'm going to just caution you here, it says, just a punch in the little girl's pussy, just a punch in the young girl's pussy. That's how the song ends. So Keir Starmer's puffing up his chest saying, Elon Musk, shut up. You know what, Labour Party? Pay attention to what your own party is doing. Never mind what's happening out on the streets. So it's bizarre. Yeah. So anyway, I'll have a video of that up this weekend.
Interesting. So I just wanted to touch on what you said about Elon Musk, because normally you wouldn't, you agree that a billionaire and somebody in one country. And I think I would agree with you if things were normal in the world.
Exactly.
But things are not normal. And you did say earlier that elected officials aren't speaking up. The media, who is meant to be holding elected officials to account, are censoring things. And the other thing is there are powerful interests and billionaires in the background doing these things that Elon Musk is doing incredibly publicly. So I think that's something that we don't put enough attention onto, is the behind the scenes. Like sometimes we see a little picture of billionaires, and we do know that there's a lot of backhanded deals. I think that at least if it's public, it's transparent, it's open, you could see it. I think I value that so much more than those backroom, secret, sinister meetings.
I agree. And, one of the things that was so funny, as the media was trying to deflect, North American media as well, look over there, look over there. Who does Musk think he is? Darn it, a billionaire should not be involved in politics like that. So Elon Musk said, excuse me, what about George Soros and all his billions everywhere, changing the district attorneys and the landscape of all the different local political dynamics? That should count for something. But no, it's only if someone like Elon Musk speaks up. And again, I wish, there was a world where we could all simply be our citizens and claim our rights and responsibilities and not have it weighted differently depending on how much cash you have in the bank. But we don't have that.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I think the one kind of factor that allows it is if it's done openly and transparently. Because you can't get a meeting with Keir Starmer or Trump or Trudeau unless you have a ton of cash. But anybody can put it out publicly, and that's the one benefit that we have with social media and things. And anyway, just incredible, insane, unbelievable that this is happening. And when you said that this affects the souls of these girls, I think it goes a lot further in that it affects the soul of the community, the country, and even the world, because I think that there's lots of strange things going on right now, and there's a lot of attention being brought to it, right? Thankfully, I think lots of people are recognizing that there's, a lot of things that they don't know, and they have to put their minds to these things. But I want to come back a little bit to Canada, because early on you said that you were doing a lot of this women's rights things in Canada. And I don't think you were talking about anything to do with the gang rapes at the time, but you said you couldn't get the ear of politicians in Canada.
Say that again. I didn't hear what you said. I couldn't
You
get
couldn't get
the ears. That had to do with pornography. Okay,
right.
so
tell me about that more, please.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm like yourself, anti-censorship. We should have people having open, honest discussions.
Yeah.
And if we speak from our hearts without shame, that's a way that you build a community and a society. And so I agree that we should, I don't like pornography. I wouldn't ever say censor it, because we live in a free and open society. However, people 18 and under 18 should not be having access to this. They should be able to grow and flower into their own lives the way they want. They shouldn't be having it pumped at them in schools and at home, in their bedrooms, etc. And if you just look at how the movies evolved over the last 50 years, it became more and more pornographic, soft porn. Some of it's a little bit hardcore porn. And people let their kids watch it at home or go to the movies. They think, oh yeah, I'm grown up enough to watch these movies. Well, no, you're not grown up enough. You're under 18. Shut up, go to bed. But so I was trying to get some discussions going and on what we needed to do. Now remember, I'm in technology, okay? And I was invited to the CRTC. They were going to look at this with some others. So a group of us were invited from different angles, including some artists and this and that. And rather than listen to the technology person who was also speaking about what we have to do for children 18 and under 18 to protect them, they were listening to the artists who said, oh my gosh, it's technology. We can't control it. Everything happened, blah, blah, blah. They were going on and on about how it just couldn't be controlled. We can send men to the moon. We can control technology. So wouldn't you know, like a year after that, Disney was brilliant at going after anybody who showed images of Disney without their licensing. They had programs going, we could do that, but we couldn't look after kids, right? Now, the other piece is I had been speaking to different justice ministers back in the early 90s, and some of them were like really moved by how I framed the language around why this had to be done. And yet the powerful lobbyists were funded by the porn industry, and you couldn't get very far as a woman. What would happen is, there might be 99 women against the pornography industry, but if the media found one woman who said, yippee, hurrah, it's great, that's the person who would get quoted on the front page. And they'd say, oh, yes, this feminist really loves pornography and thinks it's all fine and hip and cool. And we're going, well, there's 99 of us who don't, but it didn't ever matter. So I lost that along with everybody else. And now it's, evolved into something really more horrific than I even imagined. So
you were in the 90s trying to have some kind of restrictions and regulations in place so that maybe it wouldn't be available to children online.
Online, or also teaching parents that, an R-rated movie with all of that, don't let it be for adults. Don't have your 3-year-old in the room with you. That's not okay, right? So lots of parents just didn't really understand how unfortunate it is to pump an industry's, thing. Do you remember when Pierre Trudeau said that the government doesn't belong in our bedroom? Okay. Yeah. I totally agree. The government doesn't, but the corporations don't belong in our bedrooms either. Yeah. That's private space. And, we had, media industries and, Hollywood movies, and also the big, porn industry, which is bigger than the Hollywood movie industry, just in our bedrooms, out. I don't want them there. So,
Well, and it's one thing with children, and there were restrictions on social media things were like just taking way too long. And it's not hard to do these things. Like when kids had Saturday programming of cartoons, they let any advertisements be on before, and then they realized, oh, that's not right. We shouldn't be
mm,
showing some of
mm,
these things. So
mm,
there were regulatory restrictions put in place so that
mm.
Saturday cartoon programming didn't have certain commercials when children were watching. None of these things are difficult to do.
I know.
Like you said, we put a man off and moon, I think.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say, I don't know. I think we did. But anyway, but we could do incredible things
Yeah.
technologically if you think about what we can do. I mean, the whole, just even medically, all the things that we can say, let's try this and go forward. You have to first start with a will, right? And then
Yeah.
a vision. But instead, the politicians just would hem and haw and fuss and whatever and not want to get in the line of fire, because the moment you say, just like now, there are books in schools that are pornographic, but because they are aligned to the LGBTQ vision, then if you say, I don't really think that should be there for kids, I mean, it should be in the library, adults can rent it or use it or whatever, but that really shouldn't be in a classroom for 8-year-olds, then the left goes hysterical and says, we're censoring. Well, yeah, we're censoring what little children see. I think that's normal. It's called parenting and
Yeah.
proper social responsibility.
Well, and one thing I have not been able to get my head around is elected officials that have children that are allowing this to happen because it affects their children. And if not their children, there's children's children. I
Yeah.
wasn't fortunate enough to have children, but that's one thing I just cannot get my head around because it's so much more long-term effect than
It
just,
is.
yeah. So were you able to reconcile that, or did any elected officials note anything
Well,
about their
so
own
so just
life?
to let you know, there were
Yeah.
some lovely elected officials who really cared. Like there was a justice minister in New Brunswick, Canada, who just took notes like fast and furious as I was speaking because she just hadn't framed it that way. She loved it. Okay. But then she would have to try to get that through her parliament, and that wasn't easy, right? It just doesn't happen. So the thing is that culturally, if you couldn't break the log jam around the mental feeling of, oh no, censorship, okay? Now we're on the other side where the left is going, censor everything except this stuff, except the pornography and shoving this stuff in front of little kids. That should be free. But everything else, if you say something that hurts my feelings, it should be censored. Like we're on the wrong edge of it, right?
Yeah.
I believe in free speech and protecting children from dangerous and harmful material, and it's been proven it's not good for them.
Well, yeah. I don't think we need much proof for looking around society, and knowing as an adult how that can affect you. And I think I would really like to wrap it up with this, which might be the most difficult question, because you did start with saying, and remind me the title of your book. It's called
Oh, it's called
Multi.
Notes from a Blonde, Why This Anything Goes Multiculturalism Has to Go. And it's by Maret Jaks, Maretjaks. Now, let me tell you, I took 6 weeks off work to write this, okay? Because when I write, I get into like 18-hour writing sessions. I took 6 weeks off to write it, pull it together. That cost me money because I get paid by my clients when I'm working for them. And if I'm not working for them, I'm getting zero. And I never wrote this book to make money. If you want a copy of this for free, you can go to my Substack, Maret, substack.com. And in the article called, the Substack called Time to Rock the Multicultural Boat, you can just download the PDF. It's all yours. I mean, people can just do what they want with it and read about it and understand it, because I talk more than just on the child rape gang. That I don't mean just, but that was one example of many that I had about animal rights protections. Like we're degrading our animal rights protections. Did you know that in Southern Ontario, because of multiculturalism, a judge has decided that the Portuguese community can do a bullfight? Now, it's supposedly a bloodless bullfight. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. but it's supposedly a blood, but that's because of multiculturalism. The community said, we get to do this back home. We should be able to do it here. We have all sorts of examples of why our Western vision of what's fair and just is being degraded by the notion of multiculturalism, what happens elsewhere. So I put that in there. And I hit across all religions and everybody. I hit everybody on that. But the point is, it's important to really ask what's important for a good society and how do we want to live, and that's how democracy evolves, right? Not just slapping you with multiculturalism. Shut up.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly where I wanted to go, and this is the question I wanted to ask you, because when I wrote my book, Reconnect to Canada, which literally was just supposed to be kind of an educational tool. So it starts with the history of Canada, the charter, legal system, political system, and how to get involved so that people understand that a bit more. But my biggest challenge in writing that was to identify what it means to be a Canadian right now. Because I think that we were taught for the last at least 20 years, some years, 40 years, multiculturalism, inclusivity. So you've identified a lot of problems with particularly those two things. And so do you think that perhaps this is why in Canada there's a lot of division right now, uncertainty? I don't think that Canada is very united right now on many fronts. And then would you be able to offer your thoughts as to what you think it means to be Canadian or the Canadian identity, given all you've done and learned?
Right. So as you know, I've traveled a lot, and I always have a Canadian flag on my suitcase. And I cannot tell you how many people come up to me trustingly and say, I'm so glad you're Canadian. I need your help with this. Another example, when I lived in Paris, a young woman adopted me because she was just living in Paris from South America. And so she and I became friends, even though we had 25 years difference on us. And what was so lovely was when her mother finally came up to visit her daughter in Paris, her mother took me out for a glass of champagne, as one would do in Paris, and said, I was so worried when my daughter came here, on her own, so far away. And when I found out she made a friend, I wanted to know who this friend was. But when I found out she was Canadian, I thought, oh, good, she's Canadian. Because we're trustworthy, we are kind, and sometimes we're kind to a fault. And that is where I think we've made a mistake on multiculturalism. Yes, let's be kind. Let's not judge each other based on race, etc. And I agree with all that. But there is a line in the sand. And for a Canadian, we worked really hard right into the 80s to make sure that people should not be treated differently based on their race, religion, ethnicity, country of origin. Now, when someone's walking straight into me because I'm less than a dog in their world, that's not Canadian. That is judging me based on the color of my skin and maybe the color of my hair. So that's not. Secondly, we allow women and men the full breadth of our society and the pleasures we can get from it and the rights we can have within it. Education, work, be at home. Like, I'll just have to tell you that my former husband chose to stay at home with our second child because I was making a lot more money than he was, and it was better for him to stay home, and he loved it, and he was able to do some volunteer computer work for people and so on. So men and women are equal. People who are homosexuals should have every right to live freely, get married, do their lives, etc., and without being thrown off the top of a roof, as it happens in some countries. And the fourth one is Jews have every right to function and live freely and safely in our society. That's pretty Canadian. I can't, and you might say, okay, other countries have that, but we were at the forefront. I mean, it's our Constitution or our Charter of Rights and Freedoms put the right of the sexes, equal sexes, in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Doesn't mean the same. Like, I know I'm not a man, and I know that I'm heterosexual, so I'm attracted to men. Like, I understand the difference between the two, but But simply because I'm female doesn't mean I have to get, knocked out of opportunities that I wish to have. And so those are the simple things that we put together. And that was great. And we were advanced for the Western world. We were ahead of a lot of places. And now we've all of a sudden lost our way, I think. And we're putting women's rights at risk, and children, of course, as well. But I also have in my neighborhood, lots of little kids. And some of the little kids, you just look at how they're treated, the boys versus the girls. And I think that's not fair. And that's how it was when I was the little girl. We changed that, to make it better for girls to have equal footing in our world. So
and now you're
what it means
suggesting it's the opposite. Now boys are on a lesser
no,
foot?
there's some cultures in my neighborhood where it's a cultural thing. And because they can say it's our culture, that means my little brown girl gets treated differently and lesser than, because that's our culture. Now, that used to be the North American culture too, and we changed that. Like I loved sports when I was young, and girls couldn't have sports. We couldn't have the sports and enjoy the things that I would have loved until a number of years after I was young, because my sister was able to enjoy it, and she's just 6 years younger than I am. She got to play hockey. I didn't, so I'll never forgive my family for that. Well, it wasn't my family. There was no hockey for girls, okay? Zero. So we had a culture like this. So for a Canadian, it's like the general principles of equal rights for all humans. And that includes both ways, not just from me to other cultures, but from other cultures to me. And that should happen in our culture here.
That's such a beautiful, and that is, I think, what people think of Canada. But when you dig a little bit deeper, things haven't been like that in practice. So I think we need to come back to that. And maybe if I could ask this last one is, how do you think we could get there? What is it that we need to do as Canadians? Because looking at elected officials, looking at
you can't. You have to. You have to do it. I think you have to. I'm going to read the last bit, and this is how I think. We who live in the West. Okay, so in the West, people have the responsibility to function as citizens who uphold the Western ideals of equal rights and opportunities for all. We who live in the West live in the best place on earth. Let's work together to keep it that way. To do this, we must talk openly and fairly with one another, because we can only find our way to a brighter future that draws upon all of our cultural strengths if we permit ourselves to speak from our hearts without shame. Okay?
Beautiful. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
That was, and that's the conclusion in your book, or in
That's the conclusion. But here's the news. I panicked and took the book off the market because I thought, oh no, I'm going to be called racist. And I didn't even take my own advice. But you know what? This is the hill I die on. Yeah, this is the hill I die on. We have to stop the nonsense of apologizing for having a wonderful society that can always be improved, right? That's part of democracy. But you don't go, this happened 200 years ago. Shame on you. Well, you know what? That was then, this is now. How do we make the world better for ourselves, all of us? And that includes my children and grandchildren.
Yeah. Well said. Well, thank you so much for this incredible discussion, although very difficult at times. It is something we need to talk about. We need to be adults, because there are vulnerable people in society that need our help, and we can't keep ignoring it or shaming people. We need to act like adults and talk about solutions, because nothing is going to change otherwise. So thank you again for bringing attention to it and for chatting with me today.
Thank you. Okay, take care.